It was a quiet night in the hospital when I received a strange page from the morgue. They claimed a patient who had passed away hours ago was walking around. When I rushed there, the room was empty, but I could feel a chilling presence, as if someone was watching me from the shadows. My name is Dr. Ethan Harrow, and this was the beginning of a series of events that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The hospital was an old building, with a history that stretched back over a century. It had seen countless lives saved and lost within its walls, and if you listened closely, you could almost hear the whispers of the past. I had worked there for several years, and though I had experienced my fair share of unexplainable occurrences, nothing had prepared me for what was about to unfold. After the call from the morgue, I checked the security footage, expecting it to be some sort of practical joke. However, what I saw sent shivers down my spine. The video showed the sheet-covered body of the deceased patient sitting up, swinging its legs over the side of the table, and then walking out of frame. The timestamp confirmed it was just minutes before the page. I replayed the footage, hoping to find some logical explanation, but there was none. It was as if the person had come back to life. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to investigate the patient's medical history. The patient, a man named Michael Rowland, had been admitted after a severe car accident. Despite our best efforts, he succumbed to his injuries. Or so we had thought. His file revealed nothing out of the ordinary, no history of illness that could explain what happened. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole after leaving the morgue. The next few nights were fraught with tension. Reports of strange noises and sightings of a figure roaming the corridors after dark began to surface from both staff and patients. Some claimed to hear whispers in their ears, calling their names softly, only to turn around and find no one there. It felt as though the hospital had taken on a life of its own, with Michael Rowland at the center of this maelstrom of fear. Determined to confront this head-on, I decided to stay overnight, hoping to encounter whatever was causing this disturbance. Armed with nothing but a flashlight in my medical bag, I patrolled the halls. The hospital at night was a different beast. The familiar became foreign. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret, and the silence was oppressive. It was close to midnight when I heard the sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor. They were slow, deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was making them wanted to be heard. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, until I reached the old wing of the hospital, which had been closed for renovations. The door to the wing was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it moved in the draft. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. As I moved forward, the temperature seemed to drop, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. Suddenly, I saw him. Michael Rowland was standing at the end of the hallway, his back to me. He was perfectly still, and even from a distance, I could see the hospital gown clinging to his frame, stained with the blood from his injuries. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. My medical instincts kicked in, and I approached, intent on offering help. As I reached out to touch his shoulder, he turned around swiftly, his face a mask of pain and anger. But it was his eyes that stopped me dead in my tracks. They were empty, void of life, yet filled with an indescribable sorrow. It was then I realized this was no ghost. Michael Rowland was alive, but barely. He spoke in a hoarse whisper, telling me of how he had woken up in the morgue, trapped in his own body, unable to move or scream, thought to be dead. In a state of panic and confusion, he had wandered the hospital, seeking help but finding none. The isolation had driven him to the brink of madness, his presence haunting the hospital not as a spirit, but as a lost soul, desperately clinging to life. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The horror was not supernatural, but all too human. The true terror lay in the thought of being buried alive, of being forgotten and left to wander in limbo. With renewed determination, I helped Michael back to the main part of the hospital, where I could give him the medical attention he desperately needed. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Michael's recovery was slow, but steady. As his physical wounds healed, so too did the atmosphere of the hospital. One night, I was patrolling a quiet office building when the elevator door opened. No one was there, but I could hear distant whispers. As I stared into the abyss, the elevator started moving on its own, taking me to the basement where a terrifying secret was waiting to be revealed. Heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity, I stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut behind me, enclosing me in a small, dimly lit space. I pressed the button for the ground floor, but the elevator didn't respond. Instead, it began descending, plunging into the darkness below. The air grew colder as the elevator descended deeper and deeper into the bowels of the building. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy cloak, but it clung to me like a shadow. Suddenly, the elevator jerked to a halt, sending me stumbling forward. I grasped the handrail to steady myself, my heart racing in my chest. I glanced at the floor indicator above the doors, but it remained blank, as if the elevator had reached a place that didn't exist on any map. I pressed the button for the ground floor again, but the elevator remained stubbornly still. Panic began to rise within me as I realized that I was trapped in this claustrophobic metal box, with no escape in sight. Just then, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the walls of the elevator. It was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and unsettling. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source of the noise, but it seemed to be coming from all around me. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a sinister chorus. I couldn't make out any words, but the tone was unmistakably malevolent, sending shivers down my spine. I reached for the emergency button, but before I could press it, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the elevator into complete darkness. I desperately fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling as I clicked it on, casting a feeble beam of light into the abyss. As the light washed over the walls of the elevator, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Words were scrawled in what looked like blood, covering every inch of the walls. They were jagged and uneven, as if they had been written by someone driven to madness. "Leave this place," the words seemed to scream at me, before it's too late. I felt a surge of terror wash over me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. I knew I had to get out of this elevator, out of this building, before whatever malevolent force that lurked within these walls consumed me whole. I pressed myself against the doors, pounding on them with all my strength, but they refused to budge. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my ears like a cacophony of torment. Suddenly, the elevator lurched into motion again, this time ascending with terrifying speed. I clung to the handrail for dear life, my stomach churning with fear and dread. As the elevator rocketed upwards, I braced myself for whatever horrors awaited me on the other side. The doors finally slid open, revealing the familiar sight of the ground floor lobby. I stumbled out of the elevator, gasping for breath as if I had just emerged from the depths of hell itself. I looked back at the elevator, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but it was empty save for the flickering fluorescent light above. I staggered out of the building, my heart still racing with terror. I knew I would never forget the night, the feeling of being trapped in that haunted elevator with no way out. And as I looked back at the building one last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent was still watching me from within its walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to fall prey to its sinister grasp. While working the night shift, a call came in from an unknown number. The caller had a haunting voice and mentioned my name. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps behind me. It was as if something was getting closer and closer, eager to consume my soul. My heart raced as I answered the phone, my fingers trembling against the cold metal of the receiver. "Hello?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own racing pulse. "Hello, Sarah," the voice whispered, sending shivers down my spine. "I've been watching you." My breath caught in my throat as I glanced around the empty lobby of the office building where I worked as a security guard. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting eerie shadows on the linoleum floor. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear. "You don't recognize my voice," the caller chuckled darkly. "That's a shame, Sarah. After all, we've spent so much time together." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the voice on the other end of the line belonged to a man I had arrested a few months ago for trespassing on the property. He had been lurking around the building, claiming to be looking for someone named Sarah. I had thought nothing of it at the time, but now his words took on a sinister meaning. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want to play a game," he replied, his voice dripping with malice. "I want to see if you can survive the night." Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving me alone in the empty lobby with a sense of impending doom hanging over me like a dark cloud. I glanced at the clock on the wall and realized with a sinking feeling that I still had 6 more hours until my shift was over. I tried to shake off the sense of unease that was creeping over me and forced myself to focus on my duties. I patrolled the empty hallways, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man from the phone call lurking in the shadows. As the hours passed, the building seemed to take on a life of its own. Doors slammed shut on their own, and strange noises echoed through the empty corridors. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew that something was terribly wrong. At around 2 in the morning, I found myself standing in front of the elevator, hesitating before pressing the call button. The thought of being trapped in that tiny metal box with whatever was haunting the building filled me with a sense of dread, but I knew that I had no choice but to continue with my rounds. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 4th floor, where the executive offices were located. The doors slid shut with a soft hiss, and the elevator lurched into motion with a jolt that sent my heart racing. As the elevator climbed higher and higher, a sense of claustrophobia began to close in around me. The walls seemed to press in on all sides, and I found it difficult to breathe. I tried to focus on the soft ding of the elevator as it reached each floor, but with each passing moment, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Suddenly, without warning, the elevator shuddered to a halt, and the lights flickered ominously overhead. Panic surged through me as I frantically pressed the buttons, but nothing happened. The elevator was stuck between floors, and I was trapped inside with no way out. I pounded on the doors, screaming for help, but there was no response. The silence that greeted me was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own frantic breathing. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cold metal walls as I tried to fight back the rising tide of fear. Hours seemed to pass in agonizing slow motion as I sat there in the darkness, my mind racing with terrifying thoughts. What if the man from the phone call had somehow trapped me in the elevator? What if he was waiting for me on the other side of the doors, ready to pounce as soon as they opened? I shook my head, trying to push away the irrational thoughts that threatened to overwhelm me. I had to stay calm, I told myself. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, praying that I had enough signal to make a call. To my relief, the screen lit up with a single bar of reception, and I quickly dialed 911, my fingers shaking as I waited for someone to answer. 911, what's your emergency? A voice crackled over the line. I'm trapped in an elevator, I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. Please, you have to help me. I rattled off the address of the office building as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest as I pleaded with the operator to send help. She assured me that a rescue team was on the way and told me to stay calm and wait for their arrival. I clung to the phone like a lifeline, my eyes fixed on the doors as I listened intently for any sign of rescue. But as the minutes stretched into hours, hope began to fade, and a sense of despair settled over me like a heavy blanket. Just when I thought that I couldn't bear it any longer, I heard a faint sound echoing through the darkness. It was the sound of voices, distant but unmistakable, calling out my name. Relief washed over me in a wave as I realized that help had finally arrived. With renewed determination, I pounded on the doors, shouting for the rescue team to hear me. I'm in here, I cried, my voice hoarse with desperation. Please, help me. To my immense relief, the doors suddenly began to groan and creak, slowly sliding open to reveal a group of firefighters standing on the other side. Tears of gratitude welled up in my eyes as they reached out to pull me to safety, wrapping me in a warm blanket and leading me out of the elevator. As I emerged into the cool night air, I glanced back at the office building, shivering at the sight of the darkened windows looming overhead. The events of the night would haunt me for a long time to come, but as I watched the sunrise painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, I knew that I had survived. And for that, I was grateful. The police eventually traced the call to a burner phone, but the caller was never found. Some whispered that the strange happenings in the building were just my imagination, fueled by fear and exhaustion. But others, including myself, knew better. The night shift had shown me a side of the world I never wanted to see, but it had also shown me my own strength and resilience. And from that dark night, I emerged with a newfound sense of courage, ready to face whatever nightmares might come my way in the future.